Hey there, I'm Izzy and I'm 28 years old. I just gave birth to my beautiful baby boy, and at the same time I decided to divorce my husband. It was a pretty painful time, but I can say that I'm gradually healing with every day that passes. I want to share my story because it's a good way for me to see just how strong I have become. To start with, Dan and I met 5 years ago because of my coworker. She and I are pretty close friends to date, and one day I was just telling her about how I missed being in a relationship. She then set me up with one of her good friends who was also looking for a relationship. Dan and I met at this cafe and we ended up actually having a great time. He had the same sense of humor as me and he was very chivalrous. We ended up going on a drive after the date, and we also discovered that we enjoyed the same kinds of music. Safe to say that one date led to many, many more dates where we continued to learn about the many more things we had in common. I truly believed that I had found the perfect man for me. I was never big on marriage, but when I was with Dan, I knew that I wanted to marry him. Yes, he was so good that I changed my views on something as big as marriage. We dated for about 1.5 years before moving in. Moving in with him only further solidified my want to marry him because he was so adaptable. Another year passed and Dan proposed to me at the cafe where we had our first date at. I was over the moon. After we got married, I was ecstatic to spend the rest of my life with him. We enjoyed our time together and traveled quite a bit. We both had good jobs that allowed us to live more than comfortably. It helped that we didn't have kids. But that changed pretty quickly because Dan wanted us to have kids. I guess we should have talked about kids before getting married because I wasn't planning on having any. I have a history with PCOD and I knew that having a child would be a painful ordeal. But Dan kept insisting on trying. Okay, think about how awesome it would be to raise our kids. I mean, you get to shape an entire person. I completely agree that it would be amazing to do that, but I don't think pregnancy is something I want to go through. It's a life-changing experience and I don't even know how my body will handle it. We have more than enough money to deal with every treatment and medication required. I promise that I'll make it super easy for you. I don't doubt that you'll make it easy. I mean, why do I even need any of the treatments and medicines if I don't get pregnant? Why do I even need to get pregnant for us to have a child? Why can't we adopt or even consider surrogacy? No, I want a child that is mine, and I don't want some random lady carrying our child for us. Please, Izzy, this will be the ultimate culmination of our love. I'll think about it, okay? I really didn't want it, but Dan just got more insistent with time. Eventually we went to the OB/GYN, and after a bunch of tests, the doctor told me that it would be possible and safe for me to carry a child. So with that, we began trying. It took a little while, but I did get pregnant. My pregnancy was pretty hard throughout. I was in constant pain and I was always tired. At the beginning stages of my pregnancy, it was bearable. I could still go out and about with just a little more effort and tolerance. But as I got further along in my pregnancy, I found it harder and harder to move around out of the house. Don't get me wrong, I still walked around our house, but that was the extent of it. I relied completely on Dan. I remember feeling bad that Dan was responsible for all the chores around the house, but at the same time, I was literally incapable of helping him out. And it helped that Dan never complained. At some point, I realized that Dan was overworking himself, and if he continued, he was going to burn out. I didn't want that to happen, so after he had settled down in bed one night, I talked to him about having someone stay with us to help me out. How are you feeling? Good, just really tired. But what about you? Do you need me to get anything for you? No, I'm all right. In fact, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I feel like I'm making you do too much work. Oh, honey, no. You're the one carrying a child. I mean, yeah, it's tiring, but I'm sure it's nothing like what you're experiencing right now. I agree, but I still want to make things a little easier for us. So I was thinking that we should have someone stay with us to help me out. Do you mean you want to hire someone or have family over? Whichever works best, I don't mind. Well, I was also trying to figure out a way to tell you this, but since you brought it up, I can say it now. Oh, what is it? My mom has been hounding me about coming to stay over so she can take care of you. I don't know about that, Dan. I mean, look, how about we have her over for a month, and if you don't want her there, we can hire someone. Or we can have my mom come over. You know that your mother doesn't like me, Dan. I'm happy that she wants to be involved, but I'm not having the best pregnancy. I don't have the energy or the mental capacity to deal with her antics. I know, but letting her stay with us for 1 month will also get her off my back. I kid you not, I've received a phone call from her every single day at the same time for the past 2 months. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to stress you out. I'm sorry, but dealing with her hasn't exactly been the easiest. Oh, you poor thing. I can imagine what she was like on the phone when you kept refusing to give in to her request. Okay, we'll let her stay here for a month. Not a day longer than that, though. Of course, I'll make sure of it. Dan's mom, Polly, and I didn't exactly have the best relationship. From the time we met, back when Dan and I were dating, she's been pretty hostile and aggressive with me. She has never failed to make me feel bad about myself. She would constantly make comments about my weight, my appearance, my personality. When we got married, her behavior only got worse. When she found out that I would continue to work after getting married, she lost her mind. She kept telling Dan about how I was being a disrespectful wife who didn't care about her husband. According to her, I should have stayed home and taken care of the house while waiting on my husband arm and foot. Of course, these are very outdated views, and I said so too. Of course, that led to her yelling at me for trying to brainwash her with modern, disgusting ideologies. Dan has tried his best to keep the peace between the two of us, although he's never really said anything against his mother. We used to have fights about it because I always felt like I was the one compromising, but he never ever asked her to make any compromise. But I ended up letting it go because I loved him and I didn't want to cause any problems with it. I did tell him that I would be actively avoiding his mother, and he could not change my mind about that. I guess he agreed with that because that meant less work for him to deal with. Polly and I have had the bare minimum conversations, but she did become a lot easier to deal with when I got pregnant. She believed that this pregnancy would force me to become the ideal housewife. I didn't want to start anything, so I didn't tell her that I planned to go back to work after I had the child. I was skeptical about her helping me out because even though she was nicer, it didn't mean that she wouldn't keep throwing insults my way. But I guess I also figured dealing with her for only a month would also make it easier for Dan, so I agreed. When Polly arrived, the first words out of her mouth were the state of the house. Ugh, look at the filth you guys are living in. Yeah, excuse the mess. I haven't had time or energy to clean up. You're the one cleaning up? What about Izzy? I'm currently heavily pregnant and I can barely stand, so Dan's helping me out, which I'm super grateful for. Who cares if you're grateful or not? My son isn't supposed to be working this hard for someone who does nothing but sit around and complain all day. Mom! No, you stay out of this. You've done enough for her. While I'm here, I'll whip her into shape. I really can't do much. Nonsense. I've been pregnant before and it wasn't that hard for me. Sure, but every woman experiences pregnancy differently. I'm glad you had an easy one, but I sure as hell am not. I'm so sorry that you have to deal with all this, Dan. Don't worry, I'm here now, and you won't have to do a thing. I rolled my eyes at her, but didn't say a word. I felt like Polly had a weird thing where she needed to prove that she was better than me for Dan, which was concerning. But it didn't affect my relationship with Dan, so I didn't really bother with it too much. The next few weeks were hell. Every time Polly did something around the house, she would make sure to tell Dan about it, while also telling him that all I did was sit and watch TV. Polly also never failed to yell at me for making up my struggles. She would keep telling me that I was just trying to get attention. I ignored it to the best of my abilities, but every once in a while I would retort back, and that would lead to a screaming match between the two of us. I tried to talk to Dan about it, but he would tell me to just bear with it for a little longer. This response was not really normal, but I did notice that Dan became a lot more distant. He would come back home from work and rush immediately to his mother's side. He barely bothered to check up on me unless I walked up to him. It bothered me, but I figured that I would just have to wait for the month to get over, and then I could get Dan back and we could have a discussion about what I had felt. But all of that came crashing down one night when over dinner, Polly and Dan told me that they had something to tell me. Tell her, Dan. Tell me what? So Mom and I have been talking these past few weeks, and with the baby on its way, we realized that we won't get much time to spend together after. Plus, becoming a father has just made me so much more appreciative of her, so we've decided to go on a vacation together. Vacation? But Dan, I'm 7 months pregnant. I can't do much without help. How am I going to make it through? Look, we need bonding time together. You'll understand it when you become a mother. Dan, you absolutely can't go. I need you here. Babe, we'll be back in a month. You definitely won't give birth in that time. I'll be here just in time for the birth. No! How could you plan something like this without even telling me? Stop being a brat, Izzy. This trip is happening whether you like it or not. We're leaving tomorrow. What? How am I supposed to get any help in such a short time? Don't worry, I called your mom over. I just really need this time with my mom, okay? She's been doing so much for me, for us, and this will be a great time to show her my appreciation and bond with her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I took my dinner up to the guest bedroom and locked myself in there. I didn't want to see either of their faces. I just knew in my gut that the vacation was Polly's idea. The smirk she had on her face felt like a punch in the gut. Was that why Dan was being so distant? Because he was too busy planning a trip with his mother? How could he go on a trip when his wife was lying at home pregnant with his child? Even Polly, with all her outdated ideas, should not have been fine with the vacation happening at a time like that. I bet that she would not have been okay if her husband had gone on a trip without her when she was so pregnant. I cried myself to sleep that night, and when I woke up the next morning, the house was empty. There was a note on the bedroom door from Dan telling me that they had left and would be back in a month. At that moment, all I felt was rage. I wanted to destroy all of Dan's things, or at least cause some havoc for him to come back and deal with, but I was way too tired and sore to do anything. In an hour, my mother showed up. I just cried in her arms for the better part of an hour. She silently comforted me. She didn't know why she was called over, and she asked me where Dan was. Is Dan at work? Nope. Where is he then? Is this why you guys called me to help you out? Kind of, but not really. We had called Polly over because she begged to be here. Uh-oh. Did she do something horrifying? Is that why you're crying so much? Yeah, well, she convinced Dan to go on a vacation with her. Right now? They just left this morning. And Dan agreed? What the hell? I'm so angry and so hurt, Mom. I don't know what to do with all these emotions. Oh, my poor baby. I'm so sorry they did that to you. When will they be back? A month. A month? Who the hell do they think they are? You're telling me that Dan went on vacation when you were in your last trimester? He promised to be back in time for the birth, so I guess he thinks that absolves him of any other responsibility. That man is going to get a good piece of my mind. Cry it all out, honey. I'll be here. I'll support you no matter what. I was glad that I had my mom there with me because I genuinely felt like I was going crazy. My mom was an immense help to me for the next week. She pampered me like crazy. No request was too much for her. I finally felt like I wasn't a burden in any way. My mom kept reassuring me that whatever I was feeling and going through both physically and mentally was valid, and she tried her best to make me comfortable. I had entered my 8th month by then, and I was mentally preparing to give birth. But then, all hell broke loose. My water broke about a week into my 8th month. I was in active labor pretty fast. My mom drove me to the ER as fast as she could. While in the car, I kept trying to get a hold of Dan and Polly, but neither of them picked up the calls. I was frustrated and in so much pain. All throughout the delivery, I cried because Dan wasn't there. But it still felt good to not be alone, as my mom was there holding my hand through the entire thing. After giving birth, I experienced a lot of blood loss and I fell unconscious. Thankfully, the baby was perfectly healthy, although I had to spend the next few days in the hospital recovering. While I was recovering, my mom and I had a long discussion about what I planned to do when Dan and Polly came back. My mom tried to contact them too after I had given birth, but they didn't pick up her calls either. Even though it broke my heart, I decided that the best course of action was a divorce. It also helped that I was really angry at that point. I didn't want my baby's father to be someone who would abandon them at important times. Dan had shown me his true colors, and there was no way I would let that slide. He would choose his mother over anyone else, including his wife and child. I let his behavior slide one too many times, but I guess that holding my child in my arms put everything into a different light for me. I never wanted my child to ever feel the abandonment I felt when I was giving birth, and I knew that I wanted to protect my baby boy. Thankfully, my mom had a lot of lawyer friends who specialized in divorces. She contacted one of them, and I began the filing process. I also asked for full custody of the child because there was no way in hell that I would let my child spend more than a couple of hours with Dan. Throughout the entire process, my mom was my rock. By the time I was discharged, the filing was done, and all that was left was for me to hand Dan the papers. There was still a couple of days until they came back, so my mom helped me pack all my things up while simultaneously preparing her place for the baby. We slowly adjusted to our new routines with the baby at hand, who thankfully was a very quiet baby who made barely any fuss. Finally, on the day that Dan arrived, I handed my baby to my mom and asked her to go back home. I didn't want Dan to see the child because he did not deserve that privilege. When Dan and Polly walked in through the door, they didn't even notice me sitting in the living room. They laughed and talked amongst themselves about all the fun they had on their vacation. When Dan finally noticed me, he looked surprised. "Oh, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be resting?" I think I'm pretty well rested. So you did manage to survive without us. Told you she was making it all up for attention, Dan. I guess. Anyways, where's Tara? I'm sorry we missed all your calls. We decided to ignore everything related to home. Oh, Mom's back at her place with the baby. She's coming back to pick me up right now. The baby? What do you mean? I ended up giving birth at the time that you and Polly were away. And you didn't think to tell us? I tried. My mom tried. You guys were way too busy bonding and ignoring everything home-related. Oh, honey, that's wonderful news. How is our baby? Is it a boy or a girl? It's a boy, and it's my baby. What do you mean? You weren't there during the time of the birth, so you do not get father privileges. I told you she'd do something because she was jealous. Don't be that way. Here, I don't want to be with you anymore. Divorce? Come on, Izzy. It was just a vacation. I promise I'll be here from now on. Well, you had bonding time with your mom, and now it's time for me to have bonding time with my son. How can you do this? You can't rob my son of seeing his child. I'm simply doing what you did with your son. Enjoy feeling what I felt. Oh, there's my mom. If you're going to contest this divorce, I'll see you in court. Good luck explaining your absence and ignorance of your mother's bullying to the judge. Goodbye. Dan looked devastated, and that made me feel great. I finally felt free. I realized just how important it is to have someone support you, because leaving someone and feeling like you're free is not supposed to be normal. But I was excited about my new life. I was excited to raise my child and teach him all the things I've learned. My mom was happy that everything went well, and we did have a small celebration at home that night. Dan and Polly kept trying to call me, but I ignored them, which made me feel even more petty because I was doing exactly what they did to me. Dan did try to contest the divorce, and he fought for more custody, but in the end, everything went my way. My state is a lot more partial to mothers, so I was glad that I was given full custody while Dan only got visitation rights every other weekend for 4 hours, along with having to pay for child support. My mom has been helping me out, and I will forever be grateful for everything she did for me. She's been the best mother and grandmother. She's helped me also find a part-time job where I could work from home while taking care of the baby. Life has been going good so far. I don't care to look up Dan or Polly, but every once in a while I will get a phone call from them and I answer it if I feel like it. So far, Dan has been consistent with his child support payments, but if he cuts down on them, best believe I will have his visitation rights taken away as well. I can't wait to see where life will take me after this, but I'm sure that with the right people by my side, I'll be able to get through anything. So bring it on.